She stood barefoot on the hot summer ground, her wrist locked in her father's grip, while men around her called out numbers like she was a mule at a livestock fair. Not one voice rose to stop it. Not one hand reached out. She stared at the dirt, and she waited, the way she had always waited, for the worst to pass. But that morning, something different happened. Subscribe to this channel and follow Sarah's story all the way to the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The bidding started at $3. Hank Calloway had his daughter's wrist locked in one hand and his hat raised to the crowd with the other, the way men raise hats when they want attention. And he got it. Not because anyone respected him, but because what he was doing was the kind of thing you couldn't look away from, even when looking made you sick. $3, he called out. She's 17, strong, does what she's told. Father's discount. $3, and she's yours. Sarah kept her eyes on the ground. She had learned early that looking up was an invitation, and she was not in the business of inviting anything. Her feet were bare. He'd thrown her boots into the creek 2 nights ago after she let supper burn, and the packed dirt of the main street pressed hot against her soles. But she stood still. Standing still was the thing that cost her the least. $3.50, a voice offered from somewhere to her left. She didn't look. Come on now, boys. Hank worked the crowd with the loose, practiced ease of a man who had made ugly things sound like ordinary commerce before. She's kept my house for 6 years since her mama passed. A little stubborn, but that can be managed. Someone laughed. Not cruel exactly, more helpless. The way men laugh when something uncomfortable happens, and they want to prove to themselves they're not the kind of man who would say anything about it. Somewhere near the back, Mrs. Avery, the seamstress, made a sound that was almost a word, and then swallowed it whole. Sarah recognized that sound. She'd made it herself, many times. $4, said a rougher voice. The man up front, the one with the pale eyes and the way of standing that took up more space than necessary. She didn't know his name. She'd made a practice of not learning names. Hank's grip tightened with satisfaction. $4. Who'll give me $5? What's wrong with her? The question came from behind the crowd, low, flat, unhurried, and it had a quality to it that was hard to describe except that it didn't compete for space. It simply occupied space, cleanly. Several heads turned. Sarah's jaw tightened. She did not turn. Nothing's wrong with her, Hank said, scanning the crowd. Who's asking? I am. Feet moved. The crowd shifted. Not parting exactly. More like making room, the way a crowd does when it instinctively decides that something approaching it is more substantial than itself. The man who stepped through was broad through the shoulder, trail-worn, walking with the deliberate, unhurried ease of someone who had spent years in country where hurrying got people killed. His face was weathered and serious, and his eyes, which settled briefly on Sarah before moving to Hank, were the steadiest thing she had been near in a long time. Jack Harmon, someone murmured behind her. Mountain man, spread up past Grady's Pass. Jack stopped at the foot of the steps and addressed Hank directly. You're holding her wrist hard enough to leave marks. I'm asking again, what's wrong with her? Hank's posture shifted, just enough. She runs, he said flatly. Done it twice. Night hours, no warning. Gets ideas. Does she? I'm selling her to someone who can keep better track. He said it the way you say a horse has a habit of jumping fences. Nothing in his voice acknowledged that what he was describing was his daughter, standing 3 feet away, hearing every word. Jack looked at Sarah then. The directness of it made her flinch. A small, involuntary pull backward that she hated herself for immediately. Miss, he said. She said nothing. Miss, I'm not going to hurt you. Her answer came before she could stop it. That's what they all say. She heard her own words land and felt the small, specific shame of having spoken a true thing out loud. She kept her eyes on the ground, a beat of silence, the kind with weight in it. "You're right," Jack said. "It is what they all say." He looked back at Hank. $10. The murmur that moved through the crowd was a different kind than the earlier ones. $10 was not a sum these men threw around. A day's labor paid 70 cents in Caldwell County. Several men exchanged glances. A few others simply stared. Hank's eyes lit fast and then narrowed. The eyes of a man suspicious of his own good fortune. 10. Cash? Cash. Jack reached into his coat and produced a billfold. He counted out the notes slowly and in full view, which Sarah understood was not only about accuracy. It was about making every man standing in that crowd a witness to what was happening, so that no one could claim confusion about it later. Plus one condition. Hank's jaw worked. "You're buying. You don't set conditions. You're taking $10 from a man who watched you accept 4, Jack said. Without heat, without hurry. The condition is already accepted. You just don't know what it is yet." He held the bills out. "You sign a release. Legal. Witnessed at the sheriff's office. Surrendering all parental claim. So there's no conversation later about what else you're owed." Hank looked at the money. At Jack. At the money again. "Fine," he said. "Whatever you want." He reached for the bills. Jack let him take them, and in the same motion, whatever tension had been pressing down on the air around the steps, released. The crowd breathed out collectively, almost as one, and Sarah felt Hank's grip open from around her wrist. The blood rushing back into her hand felt like needles. She pressed her wrist against her chest and breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, and did not react beyond that. She had a great deal of practice not reacting beyond that. Jack stepped up beside her. He didn't touch her. He placed himself between her and the crowd, and when he spoke, it was quiet, close, without performance. "Sheriff's office," he said. "We get that paper signed and witnessed, and after that, the law is on your side. After that, every choice is yours." A pause. "You willing to walk with me that far?" She stood in the space of that question for a moment. 17 years of evidence on one side, a stranger's steady voice on the other. "Yes," she said. Sheriff Tom Beaumont set his coffee cup down with the careful deliberateness of a man who had decided not to be theatrical about a theatrical situation. He looked at Jack first, then at Sarah, taking in the bare feet, the marking on her wrist, the particular quality of held-in stillness she carried like a coat. And the expression on his face settled into something hard and quiet and purposeful. "Sit down," he said. Then, directly to Sarah, "You want water, miss?" The question reached her from an unexpected direction. She blinked. Yes, thank you." He poured it himself, set the cup in front of her with both hands, gently, in the way that says the gentleness is the point. Then he looked at Jack. "Hank Calloway," Jack said. It was all that needed saying. Tom's mouth pressed into a flat, hard line. He went to the door. "Calloway, in here." Hank came in with the rolling, self-satisfied walk of a man who had already decided the money made everything right. He signed where Tom indicated, without reading a single word, which surprised no one, and left without looking at Sarah. That was somehow worse than if he had looked. Worse than contempt, which at least acknowledged she was there. This was something more total. The exit of a man who had finished a transaction and moved on. The pen scratched across paper. Tom blotted the signature, countersigned, and slid a folded page across the desk. "Sarah," he said, "this document says Hank Calloway has no further legal claim on your movement or your person. You keep it on you. Anyone tries to detain you or compel you against your will, you show that paper and you come find me." He held her gaze steady and clear. "You understand what I'm telling you?" She understood that paper was only as powerful as the person willing to stand behind it, and that in her experience, that person was rarely present when you needed them. But she took it and folded it into her palm with a care that came from somewhere she didn't fully understand. "Yes, sir," she said. "Thank you." Tom nodded slowly. He looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary, and in that moment, she saw something in his face that she wasn't quite prepared for. Not pity, which she knew and despised, but a kind of tired, honest sorrow. The look of a man who had seen this before, and had not yet found a way to stop seeing it when he closed his eyes. "You take care of yourself, young woman," he said. She nodded and walked out. Jack was outside. He hadn't asked her to wait. He was simply standing a few feet from the door, hat in his hands, facing out, giving her room. She came out and stopped. She had nowhere to go. This was not a new state of affairs. She had had nowhere to go for years. But the texture of it was different now. Before, it had meant trapped. Now it meant something she didn't have the right word for yet. Something that sat in the chest instead of on it. "I said it before," Jack said, not looking at her directly. "What comes next is your call." "You said that," she agreed. "Most men say that and mean something different." He turned and looked at her fully. "What do they mean?" "They mean you decide, within the choices they've already laid out for you." He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him consider the words seriously. Actually consider them, the way a man does when he respects what he's been told. "That's a fair point," he said. "All right. Plain offer. I have a spread north of Grady's Pass. I live alone. I need someone to manage the house and handle the business records. I've got a trading arrangement, and the paperwork has gotten past me. In return, you get your own room, fair wages paid every week, and the right to leave whenever you choose. No conditions and no questions. That's the entire offer." He held her eyes throughout. "Or, I give you enough money to get to the next town, and we part ways right here. Both are real. Both are yours." She looked at him. She had a gift, sharpened by years of necessity, for finding the angle in kindness, the cost hidden behind the offer. She knew how to look for it, the way you look for a frayed edge before you put weight on a rope. She looked for it now, worked through his words carefully, pulling at each piece. She couldn't find it. That frightened her more than finding it would have. "Why?" she asked. Not the same question as before. This one meant, why $10? Why a stranger? Why any of this? His jaw shifted, barely. A man selecting the precise truth out of several he had available. "I had a sister," he said. "Long time ago." He didn't add anything to that. He didn't need to. Sarah pressed both hands around the folded paper in her palm. She thought about the room in her father's house, with the lock on the outside of the door. She thought about the 2 nights she'd tried to run and the 2 mornings after. She thought about 17 years of making herself smaller and quieter and less present, until there was barely enough of her left to be worth selling. And the bitter irony that, in the end, there had been just enough. "I'll need shoes," she said. Something shifted in Jack's expression. A fractional loosening, like a thing carefully held, finally allowed to settle. "Before we leave town," he said, "I want a room, with a lock on the inside." "Done. And if I want to leave, "You leave," he said. "No explanation, no delay. The wages I promised you are yours, whether you stay a week or a year." She studied him for a long moment. "You're very agreeable for a man who just spent $10. $10, he said, and his voice was plain and without decoration, "is a fair price for not standing in that crowd any longer, watching what I was watching." A pause, brief and level. "I'd have paid 20. She didn't know what to do with that. The sensation of not knowing what to do with something was unfamiliar enough to make her slightly dizzy. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They went and found her shoes. He didn't talk much on the road north. She appreciated that. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her paper tucked into the hidden pocket she'd sewn into her dress lining, the only thing she owned that was entirely hers, and watched the town pull back behind them in the shimmer of the summer afternoon. She kept looking back. She couldn't stop. "He won't follow," Jack said. Not harshly, just factually. "You don't know him." "I know his kind," Jack said. "When the money's already in his hand and the trouble's already walked away, he lets it go. Men like that only fight for things they think they can win without it costing them. You cost him nothing before." A pause. "You cost him $10 now. He'll stay home." She turned it over. It had the shape of truth, the clean, unsentimentalized shape of it. She thought about Hank's face when he'd counted the bills, the pure, uncomplicated satisfaction in it, the way he hadn't looked at her when he left. She stopped, looking back. The road climbed, and the air around her changed. Cleaner, carrying the cold rock smell of the mountains from somewhere above. And Sarah, who had spent her life below that line, breathed it in like something she hadn't known she'd been missing. "First time up this way?" Jack asked. "First time anywhere," she said. A beat. "Passed the Grady Road once. That's all I've seen." He nodded. Didn't make anything of it, which she was grateful for. "How long have you had the spread?" she asked, because the silence had started to ask for something, and it was easier to speak than to sit with the asking. 7 years. "You came from Texas." He glanced at her, a quick, sideways look. "What made you say Texas?" "The way you hold the reins," she said. "My mother was from there. She used to say men in Texas held horses different, like they were partners instead of tools." Something moved briefly in Jack's face. "She was right," he said. "Fort Worth." A pause. Had enough. She knew that kind of sentence, the kind that stops because the rest of it is too sharp to carry in ordinary company. "And you've been alone up there 7 years," she said. "I have." "That's quiet." "It is." "Does it bother you?" He considered the question genuinely, the way she was beginning to notice he considered all things. Not quickly, not carelessly, but with a particular attention that suggested he believed the question deserved the actual answer. "Some days," he said. "Most days, it suits me." He glanced at her sideways. "Will it bother you?" She thought about her father's voice, the way it filled rooms and pressed against walls until there was no air left that didn't belong to his moods, his needs, his shifting tempers she was always positioned to absorb. She thought about the constant vigilance of it, the way she'd lived for years with every nerve tuned to the specific frequency of his footsteps, so she'd know, a room away, what kind of evening was coming. "Quiet sounds like something I'd like to learn," she said. Jack made a sound, low, brief, barely there. That was the beginning of a laugh that he seemed to have decided at the last moment wasn't his to finish. But it had been there. They rode without talking after that, and the silence between them had a quality she'd never found inside silence before. It wasn't waiting to turn dangerous. It wasn't holding anything back. It was just silence, plain and neutral and entirely hers to exist inside. She sat in it and breathed and kept her hands still. The first sign of trouble came a little under an hour out of town. She heard the horse before she saw it, moving fast behind them, faster than trail riding required, the specific, purposeful pace that meant something other than getting somewhere. Her hands tightened in her lap, her breathing shallowed. She turned. Pale eyes, broad reddish face under a sweat-stained hat. The man who had bid $4. He pulled up alongside the wagon with the comfortable authority of someone who expects his arrival to be welcome. "Harmon," he called across. "Word got around you picked up the Calloway girl." Jack kept the team at pace, didn't look over. "News travels." "It does." The man kept pace easily, and his gaze moved past Jack to settle on Sarah, with a weight she felt against her skin, like something physical. Measuring. Recalculating. She had known that look since she was 12 years old, and she felt it land on her now with the same sick familiarity as always. Wanted to say, "I'd have gone to 5. If I'd known there was going to be competition, I'd have gone higher." "There's no buying or selling here," Jack said. His voice had the same flat evenness as before, but underneath it now, something had temperature. "Well, no," the man laughed, the easy, self-assured laugh of someone who thought the situation was still casual and light. "Just saying, if you ever decide it didn't work out up there in the mountains—" "It'll work out," Jack said. The man's gaze stayed on Sarah. She set her jaw and looked forward, and made herself feel nothing, which she was very practiced at. She was practiced at making herself a surface rather than a person. She had gotten very good at it over the years. "She's a pretty thing," the man said. "Shame the way Hank handled her. I'd have been gentler. I want you to know that." Jack stopped the wagon. Not fast, not with any expression of anger. He simply drew the reins back in one steady motion, and the team stopped, and the road went completely quiet. He turned on the seat to face the man, fully, with the complete, level attention of someone who has already run every number in the calculation and is comfortable with all of them. "Get off this trail," he said. No heat, no threat, just the plain, final certainty of a man stating something that was already decided. The man's easy expression faltered. "Now, I didn't mean any—" "I heard exactly what you meant," Jack said. "This woman is not a subject for your thoughts, your plans, your opinions, or your offers. She does not exist for any part of that. She never did, and she won't." His voice was still level, still without performance. "You ride back to town, right now." The man stared at him. He looked for something in Jack's face. An out, maybe, or an indication that this was negotiable, and clearly didn't find it. He pulled his horse back, slowly, with the careful movements of a man walking away from something he has decided not to call a fight. "No offense intended," he said, from a safer distance. "Get off this trail," Jack said again. Same voice, same certainty, as if the first time had simply not yet been fully heard. The man went. Jack watched in silence until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then he turned back to the road, clicked the team forward, and resumed pace, as if there had been a brief, unremarkable pause in an ordinary afternoon. Sarah realized she had both hands pressed flat and rigid against her thighs. She made herself breathe, made herself, finger by careful finger, release. "You all right?" Jack asked, eyes forward. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "You can say if you're not." "I know." She smoothed her hands across her dress, straightened her back. "I'm fine." A pause, a real pause, in which she decided something. "Thank you." It was a different thank you than the kind she gave automatically. the kind trained into her by years of softening situations before they could harden. This one came from somewhere specific and real, and it cost something to give it, and she gave it anyway. "You don't need to thank me for that," Jack said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." He didn't answer, but the line of his shoulder shifted, some small, private adjustment, like something finding the shape it was meant to hold. They rode on into the quiet. Sarah kept her hands in her lap and stared at the trail ahead, and breathed in the mountain air slowly, as if learning how. She told herself not to trust this. She told herself to wait, to watch, to keep the part of herself that could still run, ready to run. She told herself all of that, and underneath all of it, small, cautious, fragile as a thing just starting to breathe, something she hadn't felt in a very long time, had quietly, carefully begun. She didn't have a name for it yet. She decided to let it be. The spread past Grady's Pass was nothing like she'd imagined. She hadn't let herself imagine much. Imagining things had a cost she'd learned not to pay. But whatever she'd allowed herself to picture, something rough, sparse, smelling of tobacco and old leather and neglect, it wasn't what she walked into. The main room was clean. Not the kind of clean that comes from a woman's hands working at it daily, but the deliberate, organized clean of a man who had decided that disorder cost him more energy than tidiness. A stone fireplace, a table built solid and square, shelves of canned goods arranged by size, with the precise practicality of someone who took inventory seriously. One window facing east. She stood in the middle of it and didn't say anything for a moment. "Through there," Jack said from behind her. "The room on the right. Lock is on the inside. Bolt, not just a latch." She went and looked. A narrow bed, a quilt folded at the foot, a window with a hook that latched from the inside. A small chest of drawers with nothing in it, waiting. She put her hand on the bolt and slid it once, smooth, solid, true, and felt something in her chest do something she couldn't name. "It works," she said. "I checked it this morning before I rode down," he said from the doorway. He wasn't standing in the doorway. He was standing well back from it, giving her the full frame. "You'll want to unpack. I'll be outside." He was already turning when she said, "There's nothing to unpack." He stopped. "I left with what I was wearing," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact. She had long ago stopped putting emotion into statements of fact. "And the paper in my pocket." A pause. "All right." He said it simply, without making it a tragedy, which she was grateful for. "I'll ride into Caldwell Thursday for supplies. Write down whatever you need, and I'll bring it." "I don't need much." "Write it down anyway." He paused again. "There's food in the kitchen. Eat whatever you want. My house, my food. That means it's your food now, too. You don't need to ask." She looked at him. "You're going to have to stop being so reasonable," she said. "I don't know how to respond to it." Something crossed his face, quick, wary, then gone. "I'll try to be unreasonable in the morning," he said, "when it's more convenient." She almost laughed. The almost was close enough to surprise her. He left. She heard the back door, then silence. And in the silence, she stood very still in her room, with her hand on the inside bolt, and breathed. Just breathed. In and out. Slow, deliberate. The way you breathe when you're reminding yourself that you're allowed to. Then she slid the bolt. The sound of it catching, small, clean, final, was the most peaceful sound she had heard in 17 years. The first morning was the hardest. She was awake before dawn, which was not unusual. What was unusual was waking up and not immediately calculating the sound of someone else's breathing, listening for the shift in the quality of the air that told her whether she was safe or whether she needed to be already moving, already quiet, already elsewhere in her mind. She lay in the dark and waited for the threat to take shape. It didn't. That was almost worse. Her body didn't know what to do with absence. She was in the kitchen before Jack. She found flour, salt, the makings of biscuits, and put her hands to work because her hands had always known what to do with themselves when her mind was still catching up. She had the first batch in the pan before she heard him come down the hall. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at her, then at the pan, then at the coffee she'd already started. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." She kept her hands busy. "I needed something to do." A beat. "I don't sleep long." "Me neither." He went to the table and sat with the natural ease of a man comfortable in his own space, but not claiming it at her expense. "Bad dreams?" She paused briefly, then kept moving. "No dreams, just awake." "That happens," he said. No analysis, no follow-up questions. Just acknowledgement, clean and sufficient. She brought the coffee and set a cup in front of him and kept one for herself. And they sat at opposite ends of the table, with the early light coming in, and ate biscuits in quiet. And it was the most ordinary thing she had done in years. The ordinariness of it pressed against something behind her ribs. "The trading records," she said. "You said the paperwork had gotten past you." He looked up from his coffee. "Did I put you off coming a day too soon?" "No. I'd like to see them. Today, if you want." He studied her for a moment, not suspiciously, but with the same genuine attention he seemed to give everything. "You can read figures?" "I can read everything," she said. "My mother taught me. My father stopped loving her after a while, but—" She put her cup down. "I kept at it on my own." Something moved in Jack's face. Quiet respect. "I'll get the ledgers after breakfast." The ledgers were a disaster. Not dishonest. She could tell almost immediately that the numbers themselves were honest, just unorganized. Entries made on whatever was at hand and later transferred imperfectly. Some months doubling up, others missing entirely. She spread the pages across the table and went through them with a focused, unhurried care of a woman who had learned that mistakes found by the person responsible for them are far preferable to mistakes found by someone else. Jack sat across from her. He watched her work. "You've been overpaying on the Marlowe supply order," she said, without looking up. 18 months. They're billing you for bulk pricing on a standard order. The difference is almost $40. Silence. Then, "You found that in 20 minutes. The pattern's right here." She turned the page toward him and pointed. He looked. His jaw shifted. "I'll be writing the Marlowes before the week is out. Take the ledger." She pulled a clean sheet of paper and began transcribing the discrepancy in a clear, organized column. "This is your documentation. This is what they owe you. Don't let them talk you into a credit on future orders. Take the cash." He watched her write. She felt him watching, the way she always felt things. But this felt different from the way she'd been watched before. It wasn't calculating. It wasn't possessive. It was something closer to— She settled on the word surprised, which was strange because there was nothing surprising about a person being competent. "Where'd you learn to do this?" he asked. "Keeping my father's accounts," she said. "He never thanked me for it." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it the way she said most true things, plainly, at a flat distance. "But he did keep letting me do it, which meant he kept not noticing I was also keeping track of his money for myself. She paused. I had $11 saved before he found the tin under the floorboard. What did he do? Her pen stopped moving, just for a second. Bought himself a week at the saloon, she said, and came back in a mood. Jack said nothing, but she heard the sound of his breath change, a controlled, deliberate steadiness, the kind that takes effort. She recognized that, too. She'd done it herself. He won't come here, Jack said. No, she said. He got what he wanted. She picked up the pen again. He always does, and then he forgets. She said it without looking up, and she meant it as a statement of fact, which it was, and she refused to give it any more weight than that. After a moment, she heard Jack settle back in his chair, and the tension in the room found a lower place to sit. 3 days passed. She fixed the ledgers. She learned the rhythms of the house. Which floorboard near the back door settled at night? Which window didn't close flush and needed the stick wedged under it? The way the kitchen fire behaved in the morning wind versus the afternoon when the mountain drew the air the other direction. She learned these things the way she had always learned the geography of places she lived in. Not for comfort, but for the edge they gave her, the half-second of advantage that came from knowing your ground. And she watched Jack the way she had always watched people, with the quiet, systematic thoroughness of someone who has learned that what people show you in the first days is not who they are, and what they reveal in the small, unguarded moments is. He was steady. That was the word she kept returning to. Not gentle. She distrusted gentleness, which could be a performance, could be patience waiting for the right moment to end. But steady. The same in the morning as in the evening. The same when something went wrong with the fencing on the east side and cost him half a day's work as when it didn't. The same in the hours when he spoke as in the long hours when he didn't. It made her nervous in a way she couldn't fully articulate. On the 4th morning, she was in the kitchen when she heard boots on the porch, not Jack's, who was already out back, and then a knock at the door, confident and quick. She stood very still. "Hello? Jack? It's Ruth Adler. I've got the flower you asked for." A woman's voice. Sarah breathed. She crossed to the door and opened it. Ruth Adler was somewhere in her 50s, wide through the shoulder, with the look of someone who had been working the land long enough that the land had decided to work back. She had kind eyes and a direct manner, and she looked at Sarah the way someone looks when they were expecting no one and found someone, not unpleasantly, but with alert, open curiosity. "Well," Ruth said, "you're not Jack." "No, ma'am. I'm Ruth, from the Adler place. We trade with Jack on the flower. He mentioned he might be getting some help up here." She looked at Sarah steadily, not unkindly. "You're Hank Calloway's girl." The words landed the way that name always landed. Sarah held the door and kept her chin level. "I was," she said. Ruth's expression didn't change for a moment. Then it changed all at once. Softened, sharpened, settled into something definitive and decided. "Was," she repeated. "Good." She held out the flour sack. "Let me help you carry this in. Jack can come find me when he's done with whatever he's breaking out back." Sarah stepped aside and let her in. Ruth stayed 2 hours. She didn't pry. She didn't ask about the wrist, which had gone from purple to yellow-green and was now mostly hidden under Sarah's sleeve. She didn't ask about the story, though Sarah could see from the careful way Ruth didn't ask that she already knew most of it. This was a small county. The Grady's Pass Road wasn't long, and Ruth Adler had the look of a woman who received intelligence the way rivers receive water, naturally, and from multiple directions. Instead, she taught Sarah the bread recipe she'd used for 30 years. and she told her where the best berry picking was in the lower meadow. And she mentioned casually that the women in town did a sewing circle Saturdays, but it wasn't a commitment. Just people who needed company and had fabric as an excuse. "I don't know anyone in town," Sarah said. "You'd know me," Ruth said. "And where you know one woman, you eventually know six. That's how it works." She brushed flour off the table with the brisk authority of someone who has been making things tidy for decades. "You don't have to decide now. It's just a thing you might want to know exists." Sarah thought about that. The idea of existing somewhere voluntarily, in a group, on a Saturday, for no reason except wanting to. She couldn't fully picture it, but she held the shape of it, carefully, the way you hold something that might be valuable before you know what it is. "Thank you," she said. This thank you had the same quality as the one she'd given Jack on the road, the kind that costs something. Ruth looked at her for a moment. "You're safe up here," she said. Just that, direct and clear. Jack Harmon is, whatever you've heard about him or haven't heard, he is safe. I've known him 6 years, and I will put my name behind that without blinking. Sarah kept her face still. "You don't have to tell me that." "No," Ruth agreed, "but I wanted to." She picked up her basket. "Don't be too careful, girl. Don't let being careful be the thing that keeps you from the rest of your life." She left. The door swung shut, and Sarah stood in the quiet kitchen with her hands on the table and the words sitting in the room with her. Don't let being careful be the thing that keeps you from the rest of your life. She was still standing there when Jack came through the back. He looked at the extra flour, then at her face, and read something there that she hadn't intended to leave visible. "Ruth been here?" "Yes." "Did she behave herself?" "She was kind," Sarah said. Something in his face relaxed. "She's that," he said. He went to the basin and washed his hands. "You all right?" She looked at him, at the steady, unhurried way he moved in his own space, at the way he asked questions with his back turned so she didn't feel required to answer them with her face. "She told me you were safe," Sarah said. He stilled. His hand stopped moving in the basin for just a moment, then resumed. "Did she?" "I already knew that." She said it without planning to. The words were out before she'd authorized them, and she heard them land in the room with a weight she hadn't intended. He turned around slowly. Not quickly, not with any drama. Just turned, dried his hands, and looked at her with the same level, honest attention that he gave everything. She felt heat rise in her face and locked her jaw. "I mean, I'd already made that assessment," she said. Independently. "I know what you meant," he said. She looked away. He didn't press it, but the words were in the room now, and they had changed the particular quality of the air in it. And they both knew that, and neither one of them mentioned it. And somehow, that was its own kind of understanding. She was carrying fresh water from the well on the 6th morning when she heard the second set of hoofbeats. She had gotten good at hearing hoofbeats these past days. The specific quality of them, the pace, the purpose they carried. And something in the cadence of these made her hands tighten on the bucket before her mind caught up with the reason. Too deliberate, too steady. Not trail pace, approach pace. She set the bucket down. The rider came around the side of the house, and she saw him before he saw her. And in the 2 seconds before he registered her presence, she had already taken in the rolled brim of the hat, the reddish face, the broad build. And then, the pale eyes found her across the yard, and lit up with a satisfaction so casual and familiar that her blood went cold. It was the man from the road, the man who had bid $4. "Well now," he said. He didn't ride on past. He stopped his horse and looked down at her with the comfortable ease of someone who had chosen his moment carefully and believed it was good. "You're a long ways from town." "So are you," she said. Her voice was flat. She was proud of that. "Name's Cole Briggs," he said, like she'd asked. "I know Jack. I've done business with him. Just checking in on the man." He leaned on the saddle horn, unhurried and deliberate. "Didn't know I'd find you here. That's a welcome surprise." "Mr. Harmon is out on the east fence," she said. "If you have business with him, you can wait." "I'm comfortable right here," Cole said. The smile stayed in place. "You settling in all right?" "Fine," she said. "That paper Tom Beaumont wrote you. That's worth what it's worth," he said, still easy, still mild, as if you were discussing weather. "Tom's one man. I know a lot of men in this county." He let the silence do its work before he added, "Just saying, things can be complicated. For a girl on her own." There it was, clean and covered, but absolutely clear. She had been hearing that particular message since she was old enough to understand messages, and every version of it had the same architecture. Here is a threat wrapped in a concern, and you should understand that the concern is the threat. She held her ground and kept her face still. "I'm not on my own," she said. "No?" Cole tilted his head, the mild, curious smile. "Jack's a good man, but a man can only watch one direction at a time." "Sarah!" Jack's voice, behind her, to the left. He'd come from the lower field, not the east fence, and she hadn't heard him, and apparently neither had Cole, because the easy confidence drained out of Cole Briggs's face and left something paler and less certain in its place. Jack walked past her, not between her and Cole exactly, alongside her, his shoulder near hers. He looked up at Cole with an expression she couldn't read from behind, but Cole could clearly read from the front, because the smile did not return. "Jack," Cole said. The casual tone was making an effort to hold. "Didn't see you there." "Cole." Jack's voice was exactly what it had been on the road, level and without performance. "You rode an hour to check the east fence for me." Cole's mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Just being neighborly." "Then be neighborly on your own property," Jack said. "You're not welcome on mine. That's a thing you already knew when you decided to ride up here anyway." He let a breath pass, not long, but deliberate. "Next time I'll ride you off instead of asking. We clear?" Cole looked at him, looked at Sarah. Something moved in his face that was close to contempt, but had enough self-preservation in it to keep its mouth shut. "Clear," he said. He turned his horse and rode. Sarah didn't speak until the sound of him was gone. Then she picked up her bucket, her hands steady by an act of pure will, and said, "He'll come back." "Probably," Jack said. "So what do we do?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, something shifted in his expression. Something that wasn't the familiar steadiness, but something older, harder, and much more certain. "We make sure," he said, "that when he does, he finds something different than what he came looking for." She didn't know yet what he meant by that, but the way he said it, the quiet finality of it, like a door closing on something that was no longer being negotiated, reached somewhere in her chest and put down weight like an anchor. She carried the water inside, and for the first time in 6 days, her hands were entirely steady when she set it down. She didn't tell Jack what Cole had said while he was away. Not that night, and not the morning after. She turned it over in her mind the way you turn a stone to look at what lives underneath it, examining every word, every angle of the threat wrapped inside the concern. And she kept coming back to the same place. It wasn't fear that kept her quiet. She had learned fear a long time ago, and she knew its texture. This was something else. This was the particular calculation of a woman who had spent her whole life managing situations alone, quietly, before they could become louder and more expensive. And the habit of that was deep enough that sharing it with someone felt almost like a confession of weakness. She got through 2 more days before Ruth found her at the well and took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" It wasn't a question. Sarah straightened. Nothing happened. Something happened. Ruth set down her basket with the brisk authority of someone who had no patience for polite misdirection. "You've been carrying something since Tuesday, and it's getting heavier." "I can see it from here." Sarah looked at her, at the direct, no-ceremony steadiness of her. She thought about Ruth's words from the week before. "Don't let being careful be the thing that keeps you from the rest of your life," and felt the irony of it press close. "Cole Briggs came to the house," she said. Ruth's face went very still. "Jack was there? He came back while Cole was talking to me. Sent him off." Sarah kept her voice level. "But Cole said, that the paper from Tom Beaumont is only worth what it's worth. That things can be complicated for a girl on her own." She paused. "He said Jack can only watch one direction at a time." The stillness in Ruth's face shifted into something harder and colder. "I see," she said, in the particular quiet of a woman who sees a great deal more than what she's been told. "He wasn't threatening me outright." "He absolutely was," Ruth said. "Just doing it in the way that can't be proved." She picked up her basket with a sharp, decisive motion. "You need to tell Jack. Not because you can't handle Cole Briggs. You clearly can. But because Jack needs to know what Cole said to you when he wasn't there. That changes things." "It changes what Jack does," Sarah said. "It makes it his problem." "Sarah," Ruth looked at her steadily. "Being someone's problem and being under someone's protection are not the same thing. You know the difference. You just haven't had the second one before, so you're confusing them." She left with her basket and left those words standing in the yard, and Sarah stood with them for a long time. She told Jack that evening. She did it directly, at the kitchen table, while he was going through the corrected ledger, and she had her hands around her coffee cup and nowhere to retreat to. She laid out what Cole had said, word by word, without editorializing, without softening it. She watched his face as she spoke. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. "How long ago did this happen?" he said. Not angry. The controlled, deliberate flatness that she had come to understand was not the absence of anger, but the decision to manage it. "Day before yesterday," she said. Something moved in his jaw. "Why didn't you tell me then?" She was quiet for a moment, then honest. "Because telling you means it becomes your problem. And I've been someone's problem my whole life. I don't..." She stopped. "I don't want to be that here." He was silent. When he spoke, his voice had changed, still level, but with something underneath it that was more personal and less manageable than his usual steadiness. "Sarah, you being here doesn't make you a problem. Cole Briggs making threats on my property to someone under my roof, that's a problem. Those are different things." A pause. "You understand the difference?" She looked at him. "Ruth said that." "Ruth's right." He closed the ledger. "Cole Briggs isn't about you," he said. "He's about making sure I understand what he can reach. That's a different kind of man than your father. Your father took what was directly in front of him. Cole works angles." He looked at her directly. "I know how to handle men who work angles. You don't need to carry that." "I'm not accustomed to not carrying things," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking you to try." She put her cup down. She thought about what it would feel like to put something down and actually leave it there. The weight of a thing given to someone else, not because you were weak, but because they'd asked for it and meant it. "All right," she said. He nodded. He didn't make anything of it, which was the right thing to do. And she noticed that he always seemed to know the right thing to do with a moment. Not dramatize it, not claim it. Just let it land where it was and move on. She went to her room and slid the bolt and lay in the dark, listening to the mountain night, and thought about the word try, which she had not used in years, because trying required imagining the possibility of success. And imagining the possibility of success required a kind of hope she had learned very carefully to live without. She was still thinking about it when she fell asleep. Jack rode into Caldwell the next morning before she was fully awake. He was back before noon with flour and fabric, and the $41 Marlowe's had returned in cash, without significant argument when presented with her documentation. And he set the bills on the table in front of her, without ceremony. "That's yours," he said. She stared at it. "It's yours. It was your account. You found it. You documented it. I told Marlowe's as much." He set his hat on the hook by the door. "I also spoke with Tom Beaumont while I was in town." She looked up. "Told him about Cole's visit. Tom's had his own history with Briggs. Nothing provable, but enough that he's been watching him. He's going to make Cole a social call." Something in the corner of his mouth moved. Tom is very good at social calls. She thought about the sheriff's careful, deliberate way of doing things. The two-handed cup of water. The slow, purposeful signing of documents. The look on his face that said he had been carrying the weight of this county for a long time and had not yet put it down. "Cole won't like that," she said. "No," Jack agreed. "He won't." He sat down across from her. "That's the point." She looked at the money on the table. Then she looked at Jack. "You went into town, rode to Marlowe's to collect a debt, spoke to the sheriff, and came back by noon," she said. "All because I told you one thing last night." "Yes," he said, like it was the most ordinary sentence in the world. She didn't know how to answer that. She picked up the money and held it in both hands and looked at it because looking at it was easier than looking at him right then. "I'll add it to the household account," she said, "in the ledger." "Do that," he said. He got up and went back outside, and she sat at the table with the money in her hands and breathed slowly through the strange, disorienting sensation of being taken seriously. 3 more days passed, clean and ordinary, and she began to understand what ordinary cost. Not nothing, as it turned out. Ordinary cost vigilance. Ordinary required her to stand down the part of herself that was always loaded and ready, the part that had been operational every waking moment, for as long as she could remember. And standing it down was harder than she had expected. It felt like removing armor in open ground. Every quiet morning, every undisturbed night, every small, reliable moment of Jack being exactly who he said he was, each one required her to let the guard slip another fraction. And each fraction felt like risk. She started going to Ruth's on Saturdays. The first time she sat in the corner and mostly listened, her hands in her lap, watching the 4 other women work and talk. Ruth introduced her simply as Sarah from Jack's place up north, and no one asked follow-up questions, which she suspected was Ruth's doing. A woman named Doris showed her a quilt block pattern. A woman named Helen made terrible coffee and was very proud of it, and everyone drank it anyway. An older woman named May told a story about her husband's attempt to break a mule that made everyone in the room laugh loud enough to shake the windows. She didn't laugh, but she felt the edge of it, the distant edge, the place where laughter starts, and she registered it with the careful attention of someone who has found something they weren't sure still existed. She went back the next Saturday. On a Thursday afternoon, 9 days after Cole's visit, Ruth came to the house with her basket and a look on her face that Sarah had learned to identify as the look Ruth wore when she had information she had decided to deliver rather than carry alone. "I heard something in town," Ruth said. She set the basket down, but didn't sit. "Hank Calloway's been talking." Sarah went very still. "In the saloon," Ruth said. "About you. About the arrangement." The word carried weight it didn't deserve, and Ruth set it down carefully. "He's telling men that Jack didn't buy you properly, that the paper Tom wrote isn't legal, that there are conditions on the sale that weren't satisfied." Ruth's voice stayed steady, but her eyes were watchful. "He's working something up, Sarah. I don't know what yet, but he's been at it a week." "The paper is legal," Sarah said. Her voice came from a long way down. "Tom witnessed it himself." It was a surrender of parental claim, signed and countersigned. "I know that, and you know that," Ruth said. "Hank knows it too. He's not confused about the law. He's laying a story, and Cole Briggs was in that saloon 2 of those nights." The 2 pieces clicked together with a cold, mechanical precision that Sarah recognized, had always recognized, as the sound her father made when he was building towards something. She had heard that sound her whole life, and every time it had landed on her. She crossed to the back door. "Jack!" she called. He was at the fence line, but he heard her. He came at a pace that was faster than his usual walk, reading something in her voice. And when he came through the door and looked at Ruth, his expression sharpened and settled. Ruth told him. He listened the same way he always listened. Completely, without interruption, with the particular stillness of a man who has decided that the time for movement is after the information is complete, not during it. When Ruth finished, the kitchen was quiet. "How long has he been at it?" Jack said. "A week at least," Ruth said. "Maybe longer before it got back to me." Jack looked at Sarah. She looked at him. In the space between them, something was communicated that didn't require words. The acknowledgement that this was no longer a thing they could manage quietly, by small degrees, by steady, reliable days. The ground had shifted under the ordinariness and revealed what had always been underneath it. "He'll come," Sarah said. "Yes," Jack said. "He will." He said it simply, without softening it. "I'm not going back." The words came out hard and clean, and without space for negotiation. She felt them leave her, and she felt the full truth of them. Not the wish of them, not the hope, but the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had finally touched bottom and found solid ground. "No," Jack said, equally clean, equally certain. "You're not." Ruth stood and picked up her basket with a decisiveness that said she had delivered what she came to deliver and trusted them with the rest. She squeezed Sarah's hand at the door. Once, brief, firm. The grip of someone with calluses who doesn't believe in lingering sentiment, but delivers the real thing when it counts. Then she was gone, and it was just the 2 of them in the kitchen, and the particular quality of air that follows news that changes the shape of things. He came on a Sunday. She heard the horse before Jack did. She always heard horses first now. That alertness had become permanent, and the sound of this one turned her hands cold before she reached the window. Hank Calloway rode up to the front of the house like a man arriving at a place he owned. He looked heavier than she remembered, and older, and there was something in his bearing that told her immediately what she was looking at. He had been drinking. Not heavily, but enough to make himself believe he was larger than he was. He didn't knock. He stood in front of the door and called out in the voice she had heard her whole life, the expansive, aggrieved voice of a man who believes his inconvenience is the world's problem. "Jack Harmon, I know you're in there. I want to talk terms." Jack was already moving toward the door. He passed Sarah, and she followed him, not because he asked her to, but because she was done being the person who stayed in the next room, waiting to find out what had been decided about her. He opened the door and stood in it. Sarah stood at his shoulder. Hank's eyes moved to her immediately. Something passed through them. Not shame. Nothing as human as shame. But a brief recalibration. The look of a man adjusting his strategy in real time. "Sarah," he said, like it was a warm greeting between ordinary people. "Glad you're looking well." "Calloway," Jack said. "You rode an hour to say what?" Hank shifted his weight. "There are conditions on that sale that weren't met," he said. "You paid $10. I understand that. But there was an understanding between us." "There was no understanding," Jack said. "There was a price. You named it. I paid it. Tom Beaumont signed the document." "Tom Beaumont is one sheriff," Hank said. "And the law in this territory on parental release has some gray in it. I've spoken to a man who knows." "You've spoken to Cole Briggs," Jack said. Something shifted in Hank's posture. A brief involuntary tightening, and Sarah saw it. And she understood in that moment that her father had not expected Jack to know that. He had expected surprise. He had expected negotiation from a defensive position. He had come prepared for the wrong conversation. "That's neither here nor there," Hank said, recovering. "What I'm saying is, there's a number that settles this properly. A number that makes the arrangement clean and gives you clear ownership with no question. She's not property." Jack's voice didn't rise. It dropped. Lower, harder, more concentrated. "She was never property. The document I signed was a legal surrender of your guardianship. That's what it says. That's what it is. There is no other arrangement." Hank's face changed. The performance of the reasonable man dissolved, and what came through underneath it was what she had always known was underneath it, the raw, impatient anger of a man who considers the world consistently failing to give him what it owes him. "She came from my house," he said. 6 years she ran that house. You sold her," Jack said. "On the main street, in front of witnesses. Tom Beaumont was one of them." He took one step forward onto the porch, and there was something in the way he moved that made Hank's horse step sideways. "You want to make a legal argument about what you're owed? You ride to Tom Beaumont. You tell him what you told me just now, and you let him explain to you what the law in this territory actually says." A pause so brief it almost wasn't there. "Or you ride home." Hank looked at him. Then his gaze moved to Sarah, and the look he gave her was the look she had spent 17 years trying to make herself small enough to avoid. The look that said she was less than what was owed, had always been less, would never, in his estimation, amount to anything worth keeping. For 17 years, that look had worked on her. She met it now and held it. She did not step back. She did not look away. She felt every second of doing it. The enormous, effortful, muscle-aching work of standing in place and not flinching. And she did it anyway. "You'll regret this," Hank said. He was talking to Jack, but he was looking at her when he said it. "I've made 2 decisions today," Jack said, in the same quiet, final voice. "And regretting this isn't going to be one of them." Hank pulled his horse around. He rode, and the sound of it fell away down the mountain trail. And the Sunday air settled back to what it had been before, quiet and wide, and full of the smell of summer. Sarah realized her hands were shaking, not with fear. She stood there and examined the shaking and recognized what it was. The particular tremor that comes when something you've been braced against your entire life finally stops pushing, and the muscles that held against it don't know immediately what to do with the absence. She pressed her hands together and breathed, and kept standing. Jack turned from the porch. He looked at her face, at her hands, at the whole complicated fact of her standing there, not flinching, when she had every right to. And his expression was something she hadn't seen on him before. Something past the steadiness, past the careful, managed control. something that had cost him, too. "Sarah," he said. "I'm all right," she said. "I know you are." A beat. "That's not what I was going to say." She looked at him. "I was going to say—" He stopped. Started again, with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing words that mean exactly what they say.
"You didn't have to stand there. You could have stayed inside. What you did out here—" "I know I could have stayed inside," she said. "I chose not to." Her hands steadied. "I'm done deciding what room I'm allowed to be in." He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that has a shape and a weight and occupies actual space between two people. "He'll come back," he said finally. "He's not done." "No," she said. "He isn't." She looked out at the trail, empty now, the summer afternoon laying gold and heavy across everything. "But neither am I." She turned and went inside, and this time she didn't look back to see if the trail stayed empty, because it didn't matter. What was behind her had stopped being the thing that decided what was in front. She put her hands to work in the kitchen. And in the front room, she heard Jack sit down at the table, not rushing, not moving for anything, just there, the way he was always there, steady as the mountains he'd built his life on. And she set her jaw and pressed her lips together against something that wanted to be more than just breathing. It was more. She let it be. The week after Hank rode away was the quietest week she'd had since arriving. Too quiet. She knew that kind of quiet. She had grown up inside it, the particular silence that follows a man's anger when he's taken it home to let it ferment. Her father had always been more dangerous in the days after a confrontation than during one. During, he was loud and predictable. After, he was patient and inventive. And patience in Hank Calloway had always been the thing that cost her most. She told Jack this on Wednesday morning, directly, the way she'd been learning to tell him things, without softening them first, without editing out the parts that showed how well she knew the threat. He listened. He didn't tell her she was wrong to worry. He didn't tell her she was right either. Just took it in, turned it over, and said, "Tom Beaumont is watching him." "Tom Beaumont watches a lot of things," she said. "Watching doesn't always mean stopping." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He looked at her. "You want me to ride to town?" "I want to know what he's building," she said. "Because he is building something. I know the sound of it." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I'll go Saturday." She nodded. She went back to the ledger, and he went back to the fence line, and the morning resumed its ordinary shape, and she sat with a particular vigilance of a woman who has learned that ordinary is not the same as safe, and let it work in her while her hands did their job. Saturday came, and Jack rode into Caldwell, and Sarah went to Ruth's sewing circle with the low, purposeful intention of a woman conducting reconnaissance in the only way available to her. She sat with her hands in the quilt and her ears open, and she let the conversation move around her the way it always did, and she waited. It took 40 minutes. Helen, the one with the terrible coffee, mentioned Cole Briggs first. Not directly, not by name, but in the sideways manner of a woman raising a subject in company where she isn't sure it's safe. "I heard there's been some legal talk," she said, to the room in general, to no one in particular, "about property arrangements, up north." The room stilled by 1 degree, enough for Sarah to feel it. "What kind of legal talk?" she said. Her voice came out even and clear, and several women looked at her with the careful attention of people deciding whether to say the real thing or the safe thing. May, the oldest one, looked at her directly. "Briggs has a cousin who clerks for the county land office," she said. "Word is, the cousin's been asked to look at guardianship transfers and what conditions make them contestable." A pause, deliberate and significant. "In the territory, An informal sale that doesn't go through the county court can be challenged within 30 days. Sarah's hands went still in the fabric. 30 days. She counted backward. Hank had signed the paper 22 days ago. "Is that true?" she said. "The 30 days?" "I don't know the law well enough to say yes or no," May said. "But I know Briggs believes it's true, which is the part that matters." Sarah folded the quilt block she was holding, carefully and precisely, and set it on the table. She stood up. "I need to go," she said. Ruth was already at her side, basket in hand, coat on, as if she had been ready for this development for some time. "I'll ride with you to the road," she said.
They were outside before anyone else had processed the shift. Jack wasn't back yet. She sat at the kitchen table, and she did not let herself pace, because pacing was what panic looked like, and she wasn't going to give panic the room. Instead, she pulled out the ledger and opened it to the page where she'd noted the date of signing, and she counted again, and the number came out the same. 8 days. 8 days until 30. She heard his horse on the trail. She was at the door before he reached the post. He read her face before she spoke. He tied the horse in one motion and came up the steps. What happened? She told him, all of it. Helen, May, the land office clerk, the 30-day window. She watched his face work through it the way she'd watched it work through hard information before, and she saw the moment he landed on the piece that mattered. "Cole's been planning this since before he rode up here," Jack said. "Since before Hank signed the paper, maybe," she said. "He could have told Hank about the 30-day rule the same day Hank decided to sell me. And then waited." Jack was quiet for a hard, focused moment. So Hank's approach, the extra money, the conditions that weren't met, that was noise. The real move is the legal challenge. "Through the county clerk," Sarah said, "who is Cole's cousin." Another silence, and in it she could almost hear him thinking. Not frantically, not reactively, but with the same ground-level steadiness he brought to everything. Working the problem like a fence that needed straightening. Identifying the weak post. Planning the fix. "We need a lawyer," he said. "In 8 days. Today," he said. He was already moving. "Fletcher Webb in Caldwell. He's handled county property law for 20 years. I've met him twice. He's honest." He picked his hat back up off the hook. "You're coming with me." She hadn't expected that. "You need me there?" He turned. "Webb needs to hear from you directly. Your account of what was said, what was signed, what you were told, in your words." He held her eyes. "You're not a secondary character in your own case, Sarah." She felt those words land with a specific, targeted weight that he probably hadn't intended as a blow, but was anyway. The good kind of blow. The kind that knocked something loose that needed loosening. She picked up her coat. Fletcher Webb had the measured, paper-dry voice of a man who had spent decades making sure his words could be produced in court without embarrassment. And he listened to Sarah for 11 minutes without speaking. And when she finished, he looked at her over his spectacles with something she hadn't expected. Not skepticism, not pity, but engaged, professional respect. "The 30-day contestability provision," he said, "applies specifically to property transfers, not to guardianship surrenders." He folded his hands. "A guardianship surrender, witnessed by a county sheriff and countersigned by said sheriff, is a judicial act, not a commercial one. It is not subject to the 30-day commercial transfer rule under any reading of the territorial code that I would consider honest." Sarah let out a breath she had been holding since Ruth's kitchen. "However," Webb continued, and her breath pulled back in, "Cole Briggs's cousin works for Judge Arthur Hale's clerk's office, and Arthur Hale has been known to take an expansive view of his own jurisdiction
when the right people ask him to. He looked at Jack. If Briggs files a challenge through Hale's office before you have a counterfiling, Hale could issue a temporary review order. That's not a judgment. It's a delay. But a delay could be used to create complications. He said the last word with the careful precision of a man who meant something specific by it. "What kind of complications?" Jack said. "The kind that make a young woman's legal status uncertain for a period of weeks, during which certain parties might argue she is not legally a free agent." Webb's voice was flat and without drama, but the meaning of it moved through the room like cold air. "I want to be direct with you, miss. This is not about the law. The law is on your side. This is about whether men with access to the process can use that process to create enough confusion that you feel compelled to resolve things another way." He meant go back. She knew he meant go back. He was too precise a man to say it that clumsily, but he was also too honest to let her leave without understanding the mechanics of what was being built. "What do we file?" she said. "And when?" Webb looked at her with something that was almost a smile. "Today," he said. "A preemptive petition confirming the legal validity of the guardianship surrender under territorial code, with the sheriff's original signature appended and my attestation as counsel. Filed before Hale's office opens tomorrow morning." He began pulling paper toward him. "It will not prevent Briggs from filing his challenge, but it puts our position on record first, which means any challenge lands on top of a document that has already stated the correct law." He picked up his pen. "I'll need an hour." "Take 2, Jack said. "We'll wait." They sat in Webb's outer office for 90 minutes. Sarah sat straight and still, and Jack sat beside her. And the particular quality of sitting beside someone while waiting for something hard had its own kind of intimacy. Not romantic, but something prior to that. Something more elemental. The shared weight of a thing. The fact of not being alone inside it. "You're not afraid," Jack said quietly, at some point in the middle of the waiting. She considered that. "I am," she said. "I'm just not letting it drive." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a skill." "It's a survival habit," she said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" She thought about it seriously, the way she'd started doing with his questions. Not deflecting, not giving the fast answer, but actually looking for the true one. "A skill is something you chose to learn," she said. "A survival habit is something that chose you." A pause. "One comes from who you are. The other comes from what happened to you." He sat with that for a moment. Can they end up being the same thing? She looked at him. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe that's what healing looks like. When the things that happen to you stop being the reason and start being just part of you, without the weight." He was quiet, and she felt the quiet settle between them with a warmth that was new. Not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar in the way that good things are unfamiliar when you haven't had them long enough to trust them yet. "Jack," she said. "Yeah." "What happened to your sister?" She felt him still. She had not asked it before. She had carried it since the day on the road when he'd said it and left it open. And she had not asked because she understood what it was to have something left open, the thing you offer to explain yourself without being able to finish explaining. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Her name was Clara. She was 16. Another pause, longer. "The man she worked for. We all thought he was decent. She worked his house for 2 years, and then one spring she stopped writing letters, and by the time I got there..." He stopped.
I got there too late, by a long way. His voice stayed level, but she heard what was underneath it. The specific, irreducible grief of a man who has never found the amount of steadiness that makes that story stop costing. She didn't say she was sorry. She had been given enough empty sorries in her life to know they had a limited load-bearing capacity. "You were in that crowd in Caldwell," she said slowly. "And you saw me, and—" "Yes," he said. One word, all of it in it. She nodded once and looked at her hands in her lap, and sat with the full, precise understanding of the thing. Not pity, not gratitude, but comprehension. The clean, complete comprehension of two people who have been shaped by the same specific kind of loss and know the shape of it in each other. "I'm glad you were there," she said. "So am I," he said. Webb's door opened. "Ready," he said. The petition was filed at 7 the following morning. Tom Beaumont walked it into the clerk's office himself, which was not a thing he was required to do, and which communicated something specific to everyone in that building about where his position lay. Cole Briggs filed his challenge at 10. Webb sent a messenger to Jack's spread before noon. The note read, "Challenge received and placed on record behind our filing. Judge Hale has been advised by 2 colleagues of the correct legal reading. Challenge will be reviewed in 30 days. I do not anticipate a ruling in Briggs's favor. Webb." Sarah read it twice. Then she set it on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed. 30 days more. Another 30 days of waiting for a resolution that was already written, in a language that should have been simple, complicated by men who had decided that simple didn't serve them. 30 days, she said. "Yes," Jack said. "And then?" "And then it's over. Legally, completely, permanently over." She took that in. She turned it over. She looked for the angle in it, the cost hidden behind the promise, and she found nothing. Just the plain, linear fact of it. 30 days, and then her life was entirely her own. She had never owned her own life. The concept was so large it didn't fit inside ordinary thinking. She had to come at it sideways, in pieces. Her room with the bolt, the flower and the fabric, the ledger pages in her handwriting, the $41, the Saturday mornings at Ruth's with May's bad jokes and Helen's terrible coffee, and 4 women who already called her by her first name. Her life. Built in pieces, in 30 days, out of the wreckage of everything before. "What happens after 30 days?" she said, and she meant it the way she meant it, not as a legal question. Jack looked at her carefully. "What do you want to happen?" he said. She had not been asked that question in 17 years. Maybe never. She had been asked what she was going to do, what she should do, what other people needed her to do, not what she wanted. She sat in the question and felt the full, disorienting weight of being the person whose answer was the only one that mattered. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to keep the accounts and go to Ruth's on Saturdays and learn to not be afraid of quiet." She looked at her hands on the table. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not just surviving." A pause, smaller. "And I think I want—" She stopped. "You don't have to say it yet," Jack said. His voice was quiet and careful and entirely without pressure. "I know." She looked up at him. "But I think I want to say it anyway." She held his eyes, steady, clear, the way she'd held Cole Briggs and her father, and every hard moment she'd refused to flinch from. "I don't want to be in this house as the woman who does your accounts." The silence between them changed quality entirely. He didn't move. He didn't reach for her.
He sat with the weight of what she'd said and gave it the full, serious, unhurried attention he gave all things. And she watched him do it and felt no fear. "That's a different conversation," he said at last. His voice was lower, more careful. "One I don't want to have while you're still waiting for a judge's ruling, and your father is still building trouble in town." He held her eyes. "Not because I want to avoid it. Because you deserve to have it when you're standing on ground that can't be pulled out from under you." She understood that. She understood every word of it, the deliberateness of it, the respect in it, the specific quality of a man who wants to give you the real thing instead of the easy thing. 30 days, she said. 30 days, he said. She nodded. She stood and picked up the ledger and went back to work, and the kitchen was quiet around them, and the 30 days began. On the 28th day, Cole Briggs came back. Not to the house this time. He found her in town, at the dry goods store, alone. The first time she had been in Caldwell alone since the day Jack had brought her there. And the timing of it was precise enough that she understood immediately it was not accidental. He stepped up beside her at the counter with the casual ease of a man who has planned his moment and is pleased with it. "Miss Calloway," he said. The old name, deliberate. "Calloway isn't my name anymore," she said. She didn't look at him. "Not yet settled," he said. "Another 2 days." "Already settled." She kept her voice flat and continued arranging her order. "Webb's petition is on record. Your challenge has no legal standing under the correct reading of the code, which 2 of Judge Hale's colleagues have now formally confirmed." She looked at him then, directly and without flinching. "You knew that when you filed it. You were buying time. The time is up." Something moved through Cole's face. A quick, controlled anger. The kind a man feels when a woman speaks to him with the calm authority of someone who knows more than him and has stopped pretending she doesn't. "There are other ways things get settled," he said. Quieter now. The mild tone gone. "I know that too," she said. "And I know that you standing here 2 days before the ruling is you making a last play because you don't have another one." She picked up her parcel and turned to face him fully. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Briggs. I'm not sure you understand yet how much of my life I spent being afraid, or how different I am on the other side of it." A pause. "Don't come near me again." She walked out. Her heart was driving so hard against her ribs she could feel it in her hands. But her hands were steady, and her steps were steady, and she walked down the main street of Caldwell with her back straight and her parcel under her arm, like a woman who owns the ground she walks on. Because she did. She had earned every inch of it. She was already thinking about tomorrow. The ruling came on a Tuesday. Webb's messenger reached the spread before noon, a boy of about 14 on the spotted horse, who handed Jack a folded note and waited with the patient, professionally neutral expression of someone who had been told not to editorialize, regardless of the contents. Jack read it, handed it to Sarah without a word. "Challenge dismissed with prejudice. Guardianship surrender confirmed, legally binding under territorial code. No further contest permitted. Webb." She read it twice. Then she folded it along the same crease and held it in both hands and stood very still. With prejudice. No further contest. The law had finally said out loud what had always been true, and put its name behind it, and the document in her hands was not hope, and it was not a promise. It was a fact. Clean, complete, uncontestable. She was free. Not in the way she'd been free the morning she walked out of Sheriff Beaumont's office with the paper in her pocket and no shoes and a stranger's word to stand on. That had been the beginning of free, the fragile, provisional kind,
The kind that still had Hank Calloway's name attached to it by a thread that hadn't yet been cut. This was the other kind. The kind with no thread. The kind that didn't require anyone's cooperation to remain true. The boy was still waiting. Jack gave him a coin, and he rode off cheerfully, unburdened by the weight of what he'd just delivered. "It's done," Jack said. "Yes," she said. She waited to feel something large, something proportionate to 30 days of waiting and 17 years before that. What she felt instead was something quieter, a deep structural settling, like a house that has been leaning slightly for years and has finally been set level. Not dramatic, just right. The way things feel when they arrive at where they were always supposed to be. She set the paper on the table beside the ledger. Then she went and started lunch, because her hands needed to do something while the rest of her caught up. And cooking was the thing she had always trusted to tell her she was still here, still capable, still present. Jack sat at the table and watched her work and said nothing. And the silence between them was the good kind. The kind they'd been building for 30 days, laid down like stones in a path, each ordinary morning and evening, adding one more, until the path was solid enough to walk on without watching your feet. Ruth came that afternoon. Sarah suspected Jack had sent word, because Ruth arrived with a pie and the barely concealed satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting for news she was confident about and has finally received confirmation. She set the pie on the table, looked at Sarah's face, and said, "Good." Just that. One word, carrying everything. "Good," Sarah agreed. They ate pie at the kitchen table, the three of them, and Ruth told a long story about May's husband and a rain barrel that went sideways in ways that had no bearing on anything except that it was funny. And Sarah laughed. Not the almost laugh from the first week. Not the careful, provisional laugh of a woman testing whether joy was still available to her, but a real one, full and sudden and slightly shocking in her own chest. Jack looked at her when she laughed. She felt him look. She didn't stop laughing to acknowledge it, but she felt it, the warmth of it, and she let herself feel it without immediately cataloging the risk. Ruth noticed. Ruth noticed everything, and had the particular grace of a woman who notices things and keeps them to herself until the right moment. She stayed 2 hours and left with her basket and her pie tin and a long, firm hug for Sarah that communicated, in the wordless language of women who have survived things, everything that needed saying. That night, after supper, after the kitchen was clean and the evening had settled into its customary quiet, Jack said, 30 days. Sarah looked up from the ledger where she was reconciling the month's accounts. 30 days, he said again. You said you wanted to have a different conversation when you were standing on ground that couldn't be pulled out from under you. She put the pen down. He was at the other end of the table, not close, giving her the full width of it, the same way he had given her the full frame of the doorway on the first day. Space. Always space. The consistent, deliberate language of a man who understood what it meant to a woman who had never had enough of it. I remember, she said. Ground solid now, he said. His voice was quiet and even, but underneath it something was present that she had not heard in it before. Not anxiety exactly, but the particular gravity of a man for whom this moment costs something real. I told you to wait. I said I wanted to give you that conversation when you could stand in it freely. He looked at her. I meant that. I also... He stopped. Started again. I want to say something first, before you say anything. She waited. What you came from, he said carefully, doesn't factor into what I'm about to say. I don't want you to hear this as charity or rescue or anything that comes from that direction. because it doesn't. He held her eyes, and she saw in his face the things she had been watching accumulate over 30 days like water behind a dam. Patient, steady, genuine. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's too large to manage quietly. You are the most capable, most clear-eyed, most complete person I have shared this house with. And I have been aware of you every single day in a way that stopped having anything to do with your father or your history about 2 weeks in. A pause that he filled with a slow, deliberate breath. I'm telling you this plainly because you've earned plain. You've earned the real thing said in real words. She didn't move. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as the woman who does the accounts, as mine, if you'd want that. As the woman I come home to, and the woman I build toward, and the woman who tells me when I'm wrong, which I understand you will do without hesitation, and which I find I don't mind at all. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, that same near laugh she'd seen the first week, closer now, more willing to arrive. I'm asking you properly, not because I have to, because you deserve to be asked. The kitchen held the question between them, and Sarah sat in it and felt the full weight of it. Not its danger, not its cost, not the calculation of what it might turn into or how it might be used. Just the weight of the thing itself, clean and large and real. She had spent 17 years learning to live inside closed spaces. She had spent 30 days learning, slowly, carefully, at the pace of trust that had to be built from nothing. That open spaces could be safe, too. That a door that swings both ways is not a trap. That the difference between a cage and a home is not the walls, but who holds the key. She held the key. She had held it since the morning she slid that bolt. I have conditions, she said. His expression didn't change. He waited. I keep the accounts, she said. My name on them alongside yours. Yes, he said. I go to Ruth's on Saturdays. I'd never ask you not to. If I disagree with you about something, I say so, directly, without managing it first. I'm counting on it. She looked at him. Those are easy, she said. You knew they were easy. Yes, he said. The real condition is the one you haven't said yet. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I need you to know I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go. I'm staying because I want to be here. Because this, she gestured briefly at the table, the ledger, the kitchen, the whole accumulated fact of the past 30 days. This is something I chose, not something I fell into. Not something I accepted because there was no other offer. She held his eyes. You need to know the difference, because I need to know that you know. He was quiet for long enough that she felt the weight of the silence individually. Then he said, Sarah, I watched you walk out of a dry goods store 2 days ago and face down Cole Briggs alone and come home steady. I watched you stand on this porch and look your father in the eye and not move. I watched you learn that quiet was safe and decide to trust it anyway. His voice was low and unhurried and fully present. I know who you are. I know you're not here because you had nowhere else to go. I knew it before you did. She felt those words in her chest, below where words usually land. Then yes, she said. I'll stay. As yours. She paused. As mine, too. Both, he said. Always both. She didn't sleep much that night, but it was the good kind of wakeful. The kind where you lie in the dark not because something is wrong, but because something is right, and you want to feel it without the interruption of unconsciousness. She lay in her room with the bolt drawn, not because she was afraid, but because it was hers to draw, and she turned the evening over in her mind like a stone that had caught the light. She thought about the girl who had stood barefoot on hot dirt in front of the whole town and stared at the ground and waited for the worst. She tried to find the distance between that girl and the woman lying here, and she found it was both enormous and not there at all. She was still that girl, would always be that girl, the way you are always every version of yourself you've ever survived. But she was also this, both things, all of it. She had not been rescued. She needed to be clear about that, even inside her own head. She had been offered a door. She had walked through it, and every step after the threshold had been hers. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. She unbolted the door in the morning, not because she had to, because she wanted to. Because a bolt drawn out of fear and a bolt drawn out of choice are two entirely different facts, and she knew the difference now from the inside. And she chose the open door with full knowledge of what it meant and what it didn't mean. Jack was already in the kitchen. He looked at her when she came in. At her face, which she knew was different this morning. Lighter in some specific structural way that she couldn't have controlled if she'd tried. He read it the way he read everything, said nothing, handed her the coffee cup. She took it, and their hands were briefly adjacent, and neither of them made anything of it, and both of them felt it. That was how it was going to be, she thought. The thing between them spoken in the small physical language of proximity and coffee cups and shoulders near each other, accumulating until it had enough weight to be said out loud. She was all right with that. She had time. She did. The twist arrived on Friday. She was at Webb's office picking up the final certified copy of the dismissed petition, her documentation, her record, the full legal confirmation in a form she could hold in her hands, when Webb looked up from his desk and said, "One other thing." She stopped. "Your father is leaving the county," Webb said. He said it with a careful, neutral delivery of someone conveying information rather than opinion. "He sold the property on Miller Creek yesterday. My colleague handled the sale." A pause. "He took the money and bought a stage ticket, heading west." She stood in the middle of Webb's office and absorbed that. Hank Calloway was leaving. Not driven out, not legally compelled, not anything dramatic, just going. The way he went from everything when it stopped serving him, moving on to the next place where he could start fresh and find something smaller and weaker to stand on. She waited to feel something, grief, maybe, or relief, or the specific complicated ache that a child feels when a parent proves, finally and without ambiguity, that they were never going to be what a parent should be. She felt a closing, the click of a door going shut on a room she was done with, quiet and final and entirely without drama. "Thank you," she told Webb. "Miss," he said as she turned to leave, and she turned back. He was looking at her over his spectacles, with the same engaged, professional respect he'd shown in their first meeting. "For what it's worth, and I understand it may not be worth much from a man you barely know, you conducted yourself throughout this matter with more clarity and composure than most people manage. You knew your own case better than most clients I've had with twice your years." A pause. "You'd make a good advocate." She looked at him. "For who?" "For women in circumstances like yours," he said. "There are more of them than you'd think, and very few people who know the law and know the experience both." She held that. Let it stand in the room without dismissing it, without immediately cataloging the reasons it was impossible, or impractical, or not something a woman did. "I'll think about that," she said. And she meant it. She told Jack that night. All of it. Hank's departure, Webb's words, the specific sensation of the door closing on the room she was done with. He listened with his elbows on the table and his eyes on her face, and when she finished,
He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "How do you feel?" "Like I just set down something I'd been carrying so long, I stopped feeling the weight of it," she said. "And now, my hands don't know what to do with themselves." "That's what free feels like at first," he said. She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I know what it feels like before," he said. And she heard in those words all of Clara, all of Texas, all of 7 years alone on a mountain, building something steady enough to live inside. "The hands figure it out," he said. "Give them time." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He went still.
Not in the way of someone startled, in the way of someone who has been moving carefully for a very long time toward a thing they believed in, but weren't sure they were allowed to want, and has just been told they are. His hand turned under hers and held it. "Webb thinks I should help women in legal trouble," she said after a while. "Do you want to?" "I think so, yes." A pause. "That would mean going into town regularly, learning more of the law." "Webb's office is an hour's ride," Jack said. "I'd be glad to come, or stay as you prefer." A beat. "And we have a horse you haven't used yet." She laughed, short and real. "Also," he said, and his voice had shifted again, lower, careful in a different way. "There's something I want to ask you. I asked it once. I want to ask it differently this time." She stilled. He reached into his shirt pocket and set something on the table between them. A ring. Not extravagant, not rough either. Simple band, a small stone. The look of something chosen by a man who thinks about things before he does them. "I had it made 3 weeks ago," he said. "Before the ruling. Before I knew how anything would turn out." He looked at her. "I want you to know that. I wasn't waiting to see how the law landed. I already knew how I'd landed." She looked at the ring, then at him. "That's not a question," she said. "You're right," he said. He stood up, and he came around the table, and he did the thing she had not seen coming, and should have seen coming, because this was Jack, who was always deliberate, always sincere, always willing to do the real thing instead of the easy thing. He went down on one knee in front of her, in the kitchen where they'd eaten biscuits and worked ledgers and weathered 30 days of a life building itself from nothing. "Sarah," he said, "will you marry me? Not because you need a roof, not because the world is easier with a man's name beside yours, but because you want to. Because we built something here that neither of us built before. Because every morning you're at this table is the best part of the day, and I would like, if you're willing, for that to be permanent." She felt the full, complete weight of the moment land in her chest. Not overwhelming, the good kind of weight, the kind that means something is real enough to press. She thought about the girl on the dirt. She thought about the bolt. She thought about biscuits and ledgers and Ruth's bad coffee and May's laughter and Webb's spectacles and $41 and a ring made 3 weeks ago by a man who wasn't waiting to see how things turned out. "Yes," she said. "Not because I have to. Not because it's practical." She put her hand against his face and felt him lean into it slightly, barely, the involuntary lean of something long held in. "Because I choose you. On purpose. With full information." He covered her hand with his and stayed very still for a moment, and in his face she saw everything the steadiness had been holding. All of it. The years and the grief and the 7 years alone and the mountain and Clara and the $10 and every day after. All of it present at once, and none of it hidden. "Full information," he said. "That's the only way I'd want it." He stood, slid the ring onto her finger. She looked at it sitting there, and it fit. Not perfectly, the way things fit in stories, but the real way, the honest way, the way that means someone measured and tried and cared about the specific reality of who you actually are. They told Ruth the next morning. Ruth looked at Sarah's hand, looked at Jack's face, looked at Sarah's face, and made a sound that was not a word, but contained the full substance of every word she might have chosen. Then she pulled Sarah into a hug that lasted longer than the practical ones, and said, quietly, into her ear, "Your mama would have been so glad." Sarah held that. She pressed it carefully into a place she would keep it, the way she kept things that were too valuable for ordinary storage. Then Ruth pulled back and looked at Jack with sharp, practical authority. "You'd better not give her cause to use those legal skills on you," she said. Jack looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Jack. "No," he said. "I don't expect she'd go easy on me." "I wouldn't," Sarah confirmed. Ruth laughed. May laughed when she heard, on Saturday, and hugged Sarah twice and told Jack he'd done the only sensible thing available to a man in his position, which Sarah thought was probably true. The wedding was small, late summer, the air already beginning to carry the first cold thread of what came after, the mountain pulling the season toward itself the way it always did. Tom Beaumont stood up with them. Ruth stood with Sarah. Webb attended and looked quietly satisfied, in the manner of a man who considers good outcomes a professional achievement. Afterward, standing in the kitchen that had been hers for 30 days, and was now hers for as long as she wanted it, Sarah looked at the table where the ledger sat, and the ring on her hand, and the window with the hook that latched from the inside, and felt the whole accumulation of it, all of it at once, the full weight and the full goodness of it, without flinching from either. Jack came up beside her, his shoulder against hers. "You all right?" he asked. The same question, the one he had been asking since the second day, and which she had given the same answer to every time, because it had always been true and was more true now than it had ever been. "Yes," she said. She turned and looked at him, at the steady, weathered, completely trustworthy face of the man who had gone down on one knee in a kitchen and meant every word of it. And she felt, in the clean, permanent way of things that have finally arrived at where they belong, that she had not only survived the life she'd been given, she had built a better one. And this time she had built it herself. And that made all the difference in the world.